webinar on our cloud so we can have a file of it later. And just give me 2 minutes while we go live on our YouTube channel and website. Perfect. So we are live now. We started our 9th session of the SDG Learning Center, and I will just now pass the floor to Dr. Van Land, who will be moderating this first part of the session. Thank you so much for everybody joining, and hope you enjoy the webinar.
Session that is co-hosted by the SDG Academy, the Association of Commonwealth Universities, the Agence universitaire de la Francophonie, and the International Association of Universities. So you will see we are here to share not only on things that could be, but also give examples of what is being done at the level of higher education. And so we're very pleased to welcome you to a session entitled Filling the Gaps in Further Education for the 2030 Agenda and Inspiring Actions Towards the Realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. The higher education of today, and next please, the higher education of today is really calling for new and joint activities that will focus more on collaboration than on competition. And that is why we're always very pleased to have the opportunity to work so closely with colleagues from different parts of the world. And here again, with the SDG Academy, with SDSN, with ACU, and with AUF, and with the IAU for that matter. So the program is what you can see on your screen, and there will be two of us setting a bit of this scene, but it doesn't prevent others from also doing a little bit of the same. But I'm pleased to share this first part with Florencia Librizzi, who's the head of programs and partnerships at the SDG Academy, and to explain a little bit where we would wish the conversation to be heading, or at least how it could be framed. Next, please. Yeah, I would like to highlight maybe just a few things concerning the higher education in 2021 and what kind of a joint vision can we have. You may be interested to learn that recently the International Association of Universities has been involved in many different kinds of national transformations of the country, actually, but also how higher education is contributing to this transformation for better societies. And this is in line with our strong belief that I think we share with all the partners in this session, is that higher education and further education are absolutely key for making progress towards better societies, but in particular also for making progress towards Agenda 2030 a reality, and to ensure a sustainable future for the many. We know that universities have been struggling in the beginning on how to engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, but this is no longer the case. There are wonderful initiatives all around the world with teams of staff and students and administrators in universities from different parts of the world to work together towards advancing on the Sustainable Development Goals. At the heart of them, we see, of course, that SDG 4, quality education, and thus quality higher education, is at the heart of much that needs to be done. Yet you would see that others working on other SDGs would also claim that their SDG, in brackets, is also at the basis of the rest, because the SDGs, the goals themselves, have their own specificities, but they are also very closely linked. What it requires to really ensure that we are working towards a sustainable future is for higher education and further education institutions to adopt a whole of institution approach, and even a whole of sector approach, when it comes to education at large. Institutions can no longer pretend that they're teaching, research, and other higher education activities, even before getting to community engagement or to their advocacy role. They don't work only disciplinary. They don't work in silos in departments, but they have started to really integrate the principle that a whole of institution approach is a better way to look at higher education today, and to start to build more transformative and transdisciplinary approaches to issues that need to be addressed in the world in which we live. The fact that we've included also this perception or the need for a whole sector approach is also essential to advance into the future, because higher education is intrinsically linked to all the other education levels, from pre-primary to lifelong learning. What is essential there to succeed and to transform the education as we would need it for the future and even for today is strong partnerships. And that is what we try to illustrate here through the partnership that we have organized around this particular session. So the key deliverables expected for the session is an understanding of the Berlin Declaration that was adopted at the outset or at the end of the UNESCO World Higher Education, the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development. We encourage you to read the declaration, to really look at what the higher education community and the education community from around the world has come up with, and how that could translate at your own level. And then also to look into the future and wait for the UNESCO World Higher Education Conference to take place in May 2022, where a roadmap to 2030 will be adopted on top of the Education 2030 roadmap adopted at the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development. So the importance of strengthening partnerships is already addressed or is already stressed. And this includes a real multilateral approach and international. Nothing is only of importance to the local. Everything is always related to many realities around the world. So what we hope to also get to at this session is to identify next steps, shared pathways for the next 10 years of higher education for sustainable development, and how to do this together. Next, please. Very quickly, and I will not spell out everything that is on this slide, just to tell you that IAU celebrates 70 years of international cooperation this year, that we're still very pleased to be associated with UNESCO and to support much of the work that's being done there, and in particular when it comes to higher education and research for sustainable development. One of the activities that I would like to highlight is IAU's global cluster on higher education and research for sustainable development, bringing together some 100 universities from around the world, always from the 5 continents, around the different global goals that are identified in Agenda 2030, and also to develop further activities to advance a sustainable future for the many. There are many projects organized there, and those are linked to much of the work being carried out by the SDSN, the SDG Academy in particular, and by ACU, by AUF, and by the other speakers that will be with us here today, the students not being the least important group with which we engage for the future. Next, please. Very quickly, I would like to highlight one of the backdrops to our conversation as well. We are still in the midst of the pandemic and the impacts it has on our societies and on higher education in particular. And I wanted to highlight simply that we have undertaken at the IAU a second global survey on the impact of COVID-19 on higher education around the world. The collection of answers closed on 1 June, and we're now in the process of analyzing the consequences of COVID-19 on governance and financing, teaching and learning, research, societal and community engagement. Next, please. The trends and preliminary results from the second global survey may be of interest. What is of interest as well is to see that we have developed the survey with many esteemed partners, in particular the Association of Indian Universities, the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, the European University Association, the Hungarian Rectors Conference, NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, the Association of Commonwealth Universities, the United Nations Universities in Japan, and their Institute for the Advanced Studies for Internationalization. Thanks to this global cooperation, we've been able to collect 533 replies from 496 higher education institutions in 112 countries and territories. And we can see already that some of the trends go in the following direction. There has been a strong crisis management at universities all around the world, and the universities deem that these have been more successful than not, with good communication among staff and with students. The results show that international students have been strongly affected, that we knew, but what is interesting is also how they will have been affected, and that will come out of the global survey. We will be able to analyze that in more detail. As far as finances is concerned, we see that it is more the external funding streams that have been impacted, and the public ones may be a little less so. Yet what is also becoming very apparent is that there is a lot of inequality when it comes to accessing public funding at higher education institutions around the world. And one of the topics that comes up all through the survey is the important impact on workload and well-being that the administrative and academic staff have been experiencing all around the world. And it is the same for the students, for that matter. And that is that will get further attention in different parts of the world, and how that will impact also the future capacity of staff to engage with higher education. Then there is some transformational impact of the pandemic that will be analyzed specifically, in particular when it comes to the digital transformation of higher education. In all, one of the conclusions is that there is much inequality among higher education institutions. And we would like to understand as well through this session what the impact will have been on the engagement of higher education institutions with sustainable development. I would like to leave it at this and to give the floor to Florencia Librizzi to provide for extra information on the backdrop against which we will build this conversation today. Florencia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hilic. Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to connect with all of you, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. So I like to thank again to the host, so to you, Andesa, Unitiar, but also to this wonderful partnership with ACU, AUF, IAU, and of course also thank my team at the SDG Academy for all of the work put onto this workshop. So today I'd like to provide some initial reflections, as Hilic was saying, that we can build together and just try to really capture what are those gaps that we need to fill, and what is the role of partnerships, as well as give you some key highlights of the work of the SDG Academy for the last year since we met at this very forum. So as we know, Education for Sustainable Development, anchor in SDG 4.7 is clearly a vehicle to enable all of the SDGs, the 17, and provide a transformation, the foundation to really deliver on these transformations that we need in our society, and also the inclusive and sustainable recovery that we are aiming and that we're discussing at this very high-level political forum. And this is because it provides the knowledge, the skills, the values, and the attitudes to ensure that everyone can be a change agent for sustainable development. So as we're facing this building forward better, as I liked, more forward than back, really, we really need to be conscious that ESD is lifelong and life-wide journey for everyone, for us individually, for every organization, for us as a world. And that there is really no one fits all model to approach the SDGs in education. And that in order to really manage the width and the depth of this endeavor, we need and fill these gaps. We need to be very inclusive, we need to be rigorous, we need to be more collaborative and focus on both actually, on internalization and as well as localization. So for this to be effective, it is not really a question of either or, but really how we can be comprehensive, yet rigorous, as covering everything, the breadth and depth that is at stake. So a quick reflection that I allow myself to bring here is we oftentimes think of what we know, right? Oftentimes we realize what we don't know, but we need to kind of really work together as partners to tackle where we can really have the leap, which is look at what we don't know that we don't know, right? And just really, that's where the challenge is, and where having trusted partners and in a common framework like the SDGs can really lead us not only to find the right solutions, which will change over time in a very rapidly and complex world like the one that we are, but constantly pose the right questions and identify those gaps together. So this is, again, to remind ourselves that it's about collaboration and partnerships, that really no one can do it all. And that acknowledging our roles, our strategies, our strengths, and partnering with others is really a way to be able to address those challenges. And when it comes to localization and internationalization, SDGs is still the framework to support both. And I think it's something that we have learned over this difficult period of times of COVID is the relevance and the importance that we recommit to really address and advance the SDGs around the world. And ESD is it has to be present and as a key enabler to do that anywhere. When it comes to the pandemic, also technology has offered a way that we can scale up our efforts in education, posing also the question of how we can make sure that we touch as many people as we can, but also that we keep the connection, the human connection, the experiential side of it, that we can not only transfer knowledge, but also the values, the skills, the experiential learning, and the connection with the, as Hilich was saying, with the communities, to make sure that knowledge happens and that the learning happens at all intellectual, emotional, physical, and social levels. So at the SDG Academy, we've been leveraging online and the technology for learning for over many years now, I think over 7 years. So we've been trying to also make sure that we scale up these efforts, trying to keep as well the depth and the human aspect to it. And this is why we are developing a community around our content. So please allow me to provide you some key updates here, and then I would like to turn it to a wonderful panel that we have in a few minutes. So if we can go on the next slide. As many as you know, that the SDG Academy is the flagship education initiative of SESN. And we aim to provide the high quality content on the SDGs, on all, covering all of the SDGs to ensure the current and future generations of educators, policymakers, practitioners, and citizens around the world can access to this knowledge freely. And I'm happy to say that last year we have moved to Creative Commons. We have adopted a license that makes us not only free, but also open, which is an important movement that was very much aligned to our previous philosophy, but gives more certainty to the users on how they can use our knowledge and how they can disseminate it across the world. I like to emphasize the fact that all of this content has been created in partnerships, that we really partner with experts from around the world, from our networks and beyond, to make sure that we can capture and provide this knowledge for everyone around the world. We have garnered around 866,000 plus enrollments across all of the platforms, and we have more than 180 countries at the moment represented across our learners. So this is clearly a scalable model, and we're happy about that. So if we go to the next slide, just wanted to say, this is a snapshot of the topics that we cover, and you can see that they're very much covering pretty much all of the SDGs. We have now 39 massive open online courses, and they're for the most part self-paced, so learners can take it at the time that fits them. But apart from these documentary quality video lectures that we offer in our courses, with activities, with assessments, and also with Q&As, webinars, and so on. And here you can see actually in the course updates, the latest courses since last year, as well as some that are in production. We have an SDG Academy Library that is a great resource for everyone to access across all of our videos, that there are more than 1,500, and access these videos as a standalone resource, meaning that they can be integrated in a workshop, it can be integrated in a class, whether it's online, whether it's blended learning, but also it can be used for any student or person that would like to refresh their knowledge or learn more on a specific topic. And this can be searched through SDG, through faculty, through topic, and so on. Another item that I wanted to let you know is in the next slide, we're going to see the book club with Jeffrey Sachs. I'm very, very enthusiastic about this project because something that I've been reflecting with some other partners is the importance of really bring some in the learning process, of course, the knowledge, the rigorous, the scientific knowledge, but also the storytelling, the emotion, the deep reflection on issues that we care a lot, that they're present, and that we can really do something about to change it. So the book club with Jeffrey Sachs is really a global dialogue and global forum on the most important issues of humanity that we're facing today, that we have faced for many years. So it was launched last January, and it has 3 different parts. One is the platform in which you can connect with different readers from around the world, read the books, read excerpts and different reading materials, access a forum discussion, but also have the monthly webinars and the podcast. So we had like several amazing conversations with historians like Richard Rothstein, with Martin Sherwin, with economists like Mariana Mazzucato on issues of peace, of racial injustice, and how to overcome these issues. So I will encourage you to join us and to learn. I'm learning a lot day to day on these discussions. And on the community side, I wanted to take you to the next slide, and I will finish soon, is an important part. If you can go to the next, yeah, right there. So the community of practice, it has been an effort of making sure that our content not only goes to as many people as possible, but also that our content get enriched by in this effort of internalization, but also localization. So last year in September, and after successful years engaging with universities from around the world through our networks, we have launched this community that now welcomes NGOs, higher education, and businesses that are working on issues of education for sustainable development, to do peer learning, to share not only good practices, which are very important and we need to do, but also our challenges. So we can really identify those gaps that we're speaking about and work together as partners. It is also about sharing our assets. What are we doing right? What can anyone else leverage? And how we can move forward together. So at the moment, we have monthly conversations exactly doing that. And this is just one that it was wonderful some months ago with Talkesting. And in the next slide, you will see also some of our plans going forward, and I will stop it right there. In terms of, here you have a snapshot with many of our partners, institutions from around the world. And on the following slide, you will see some of our next steps. These next steps involve, is it not working there, the slide? Okay, involves really identifying what are the next steps to not just sharing good practices, but also document them, making sure that we can work together with our existing communities, which are the SSN networks and the MDPs, and leveraging regional expertise to localize and create content that is relevant to the different realities and to what the different students around the world, what different educators need. So we're going to give you a further update, I hope, next year as we develop this together. And this is really about co-creation and co-designing. So I'll, I think, close with that, since I know that I have several colleagues that will further elaborate on some other exciting opportunities with Mission 4.7 and so on. So as we move, thank you so much, as we move to the remarkable panel that we have ahead of us, I wanted to just share a couple of notes with our audience. One is that they have access to the chat and also to the Q&A. So please use the chat to discuss, share resources, to discuss general points and just have an evolving conversation. While let's use the Q&A to make sure that we can identify the questions and the things that you would like us to ask the panelists. So I am truly honored to now start presenting our speakers. And the first one is Maria Cortez-Puch, a wonderful colleague of mine. She's SESN Vice President of Networks. And we thought that she will be absolutely really a great resource to share her expertise about network approach to education and partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florencia. I have a presentation. I don't know, should I upload it, or I guess it will be uploaded. But let me start by saying that I was precisely like Hilje and Florencia mentioned, the importance of partnerships and so and of the network, no, in the question of education for the SDGs. And so I wanted to present this specific output that the SDSN network produced recently within this this very topic, education for the SDGs. This guide was launched in September of 2020, and it's very much a network effort. It has over 100 contributors from around the world, people that were giving us insights on what are some of the key questions for education for the SDGs at the university level. What are some of the barriers that universities are facing, or also what are some of the phenomenal cases that exist out there. I want to give a shout out and the recognition to the two people that joined me in the editorial team, Tal Kestin from Monash University and Julio Lumbreras from the Politécnica de Madrid. And can we go to the next slide? So as we started this effort, we've missed. We're lacking the presentation, but let me just.
I'm just gonna pull it back up.
No worries, I'll continue in the meantime. So we had a very ambitious idea on the one hand, but also a very humble one. So we started off with the idea of using the model that the guide that had been published several years earlier, How to Get Started with Universities for the SDGs, had. So this was a guide that had very practical approaches and guidance for universities. It has plenty of resources, ideas on how to, again, surmount specific barriers, as well as many case studies. And what we wanted is to have that kind of approach to the question of education for the SDGs. We wanted to inspire and empower universities, but not only, also all other institutions of higher education, to provide their learners with the knowledge, the skills, but also, as Florencia was saying, the mindset to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. And I was saying that we also had a very humble mentality in that the question is very tough. It's incredibly contextual related and therefore very complex. But as Hilje was saying at the beginning, universities had advanced already a lot. So when we started drafting this second guide, a lot was going on around the world with this question. So our hope was that this guide would be very practical, had a lot of interesting resources for universities, but hopefully would become completely outdated very soon because of how much was going on and how fast things were evolving. So we thought about the guide as a starting point, a sort of conversation opener. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I only have 5 minutes, so I don't have time to go into the details of the guide, but these were the key messages for universities. First of all, education for the SDG is a critical role for universities. We have plenty of reasons. I think everyone probably in this webinar agrees, but we provide many reasons for universities in the guide. But universities should aim to mainstream it to all of their learners, not just to those that are interested in sustainable development. And to do so, universities should scale up what they're already doing, and they should launch new initiatives and new methods, new pedagogies. These will be tremendously context connected. So each university will have a different path. And again, Hilije was mentioning how the university-wide strategic process is essential. We provide an idea of what this could look like with 5 different steps. But when we were doing this and in discussions with different universities, we kept coming back to the question of the scale and the pace. So the SDGs call for a very rapid and very deep transformations of all of our activities, and education is just one more. And so really to deliver that kind of scale and that kind of pace, most likely universities will themselves as institutions, as Hilije was saying, need to transform themselves. So the 4th chapter of this guide focuses on this question. What are some of the key elements of this transformation? How are some universities thinking about it? And what could help universities, what could guide universities in this process? If we could move to the next slide, please. So this is how the guide is structured, and I want to focus now on the case studies question. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So as we were drafting the guide, we launched a call for case studies, and we received over 100 case studies from how universities were doing this from around the world. These were so good that we couldn't capture all of them in the guide, and we decided that perhaps if the guide is the conversation starter, the second piece would be to have a website where we are continuously updating with new cases. And there we could also see the trends of how this is changing at the university level. So this year we opened up a second call, and this time around we received over double the number of cases, and again covering every single continent of the world. All of these cases, so we will be selecting only 75, unfortunately, and they will be captured in this website that you can see there. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we have the guide as a conversation starter, again, a practical resource for universities. We have these case studies, and then we started hosting these dialogues, these workshops. We collaborated with the academy, as Florencia mentioned, with the community of practice. These dialogues were sometimes for a specific region. So what are the nuances of this region on the topic of education for the SDGs? Or in one language to reach maximum audience in places where English is not the first language and is not really used. We also focused on specific questions. For example, the question of the transformation. We held one workshop on that. But then there is yet another pillar of work, and it's how our guide is now connected to every of our programs at SDSN. So the national and regional networks, we have over 1,400 institutional members at SDSN. Many of them, or the majority of them, are universities, and they coordinate themselves among these national and regional networks. And these are now doing their own calls for case studies, and they're having these discussions at the national level, because there are many nuances, for example, regulatory, that will affect whether or not certain things can be done at the university level. We're working with the SDG Academy, as I was saying, specifically on this community of practice. And then we're also working with SDSN youth. Hilije mentioned students are at the center of these sort of revolution. So we need to work with them and hear their thoughts and involve them in this conversation. I'll stop here. I'll post the links to the guide and other resources, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you very much.
And to introduce the second speaker, and not again, very pleased to have this very esteemed panel. And Joanna, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this table today. We've been in these HLPF sessions for a few years now, and unfortunately again online. I hope that next year we all get to meet in New York and to work there together with the broader higher education community. So Joanna, you're not only the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities, you're also a scholar, a journalist. You've got many hats. You've been the vice principal of King's College London. So you know the higher education institutions and the system from inside and from outside. And from where you sit, you have a unique and exquisite view on how universities connect around the world within the context of, from your perspective, the Commonwealth universities. And so you have always been a very strong supporter of higher education and research for sustainable development. And we've always been pleased to collaborate also with SDSN, with SDG Academy, but in particular now over the last few years within this collaboration with you at the ACU and with AUF as well. And I'm very pleased to give you the floor and explain a little bit where next.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And I just want to correct one thing, which is that I am absolutely delighted that the Association of Commonwealth Universities, Association International Universities, and the Association Universities Francophonie are working as one network. But we haven't swapped jobs yet, Hilary, because he introduces us IAU.
Did I give you my title?
You did. And I would be happy to give you mine, because one of the really wonderful things about being at HLPF today is that we have actually been working concertedly together as three networks for the last few years, tirelessly making the points that we're making today. And between us, we do represent over 2,000 universities, higher education institutions around the world. So I think my first point is to say that we feel we have a legitimate mandate, if you like, to represent the huge diversity of higher education institutions that exist. And that mandate is one that is not been won yet. And in a way, this workshop is a stepping stone towards that, in that the high-level policy forum that we are part of today is one where I hope that higher education and our three networks in principle have a role to play every year in convening us together with the SDG Academy, with the SDSN network, with other interested players, because it is still the case, I'm afraid, that the arguments for education are mainly made for the primary and secondary sector and not for the tertiary sector. And the link and the most important point I would want to make today is that if you want to achieve any one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, then you have to include higher education, because you can't get good pedagogy, you can't get good teacher training, you cannot get applied research, you can't get education, you can't get curious citizens who will contribute to the economy, you can't get blue skies research, you can't solve global problems if you don't have tertiary institutions. And unfortunately, around the world, if you look at the gross tertiary enrollment, we are still way far away from anything like equitable access for all for tertiary education. So in some countries, for example, across sub-Saharan Africa, where you have a large youth demographic, and if you think about the potential of that youth demographic to contribute, you'll see that it's something like 8% have access to tertiary education. Whereas in a country like the United Kingdom, it's over 50%. And that is something which in some ways is more important to me to tackle from our network of universities than in the precise ways in which universities themselves contribute to the SDGs. Because to me, and this is a controversial point perhaps, I would argue that universities have always contributed to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's almost the other way around, in that what we have to do is show, particularly through how Maria has just and Florencia have just been outlining how their institutions are working together to demonstrate how the work that universities do contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. But these goals are there as our only, if you like, intergovernmental carapace under which we can strive to meet those global challenges. But universities have been doing it anyway, and do it in many and various different ways. They have to, if they exist, I would argue. They do it to their local communities in the way that they have a local place, as well as a national place, as well as an international place. And the Association of Commonwealth Universities has a network of over 500 universities in 54 countries. So it's similar to the IAU or the AUF in the sense that it is globally located, and it has 66% of its members in low and middle income countries. So, you know, the role of a King's College London or a Nanyang Technical University in Singapore's contribution in terms of perhaps making its campus carbon neutral, giving all of its students inductions into SDG goals as part of their education, challenging the ruling council of the university on its investment policies, ensuring that students are equipped and given voices in tackling volunteering and SDG challenges. You know, all of those things are almost sine qua non of any big research intensive university. They all do that, and they do it brilliantly and in lots of different ways. I think the challenge is demonstrating how in countries which are hugely challenged by climate, for example, where every day the business of being able to even get to university and access relevant teaching material and be online because your campus is closed and there isn't enough digital infrastructure. It's tackling those challenges and recognizing that those institutions, those tertiary institutions in those countries, are doing as much to contribute to the SDGs in their own way as a large research intensive university might be doing in, say, Canada, Australia, South Africa, the UK. And so I think in some ways the point of our networks and the points of these workshops is to share best practice and to think about the way that we can share the knowledge of what is being done and how it's being done, share the way that knowledge is being produced, empower people to have that knowledge and use it in their own contexts. And that to me is the essence of what the ACU should be about. So we have our own SDG network. It's got about 400 members, I think, and we've started to produce SDG challenge grants, which are given out to universities to apply for them because they might want to do a new pathway for students or a way in which they can embed something to do with an SD challenge across the university. But that's just one example. And actually, I'm in some ways more interested in how the Fiji National University or a university in India or in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or New York is actually what they're doing and how I can empower the people doing that to contribute and challenge and collaborate with people in other areas of the world to continue doing what they're doing. But then I think the final point I'll make is that it's then upon the SDSN network and academy feeding into the United Nations High-Level Policy Forum with us to look at how you collect and harvest that data. Because for me, the big challenge is, can you harvest that data in a way that convinces policymakers and countries that investing in tertiary education is actually what's going to help change the dial on the road to 2030, so that you actually have national contributions towards tertiary education, which means that the digital divide that we're living through at the moment, where so many students have not had access to education during this COVID pandemic, is tackled and changed, so that the funding obviously must continue for primary and secondary, but it must also continue for tertiary. And so how can we, through our collective efforts, put together concrete steps that provide data that influences policy decisions, that therefore influences the building of infrastructure for higher education? And that to me is the biggest and best challenge that we have. You know, we work in a sector that's extraordinary. It has brilliant, brilliant minds and wonderful opportunities, but it's also a sector that at the moment has marginalized the majority of people who would benefit from attending it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And I think we haven't said that before, but it's our agreement with Chilich is that we are presenting one each. So thank you so much, Joanna, for that. We're going to get into discussion very soon and really get these wonderful points by Maria, Joanna, and so on. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Jacob Lesius. He's chairperson, Students Organizing for Sustainability international. So we're very pleased to have him here and his view on youth and student perspective. Thank you so much, Jacob, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It is really, really wonderful to see so many people take part. And I don't know if all the participants can see this, but I can see that there's a lot of participants joining this this session. So that's really, really exciting. Yes, I am Jacob Blesius from Students Organizing for Sustainability International. And in our organization, we run a number of projects on an institutional level where we try to bridge student initiatives and initiatives of the institutions of the universities. We are also doing a lot about bringing people together, about creating communities and sharing perspectives. This is really something that is so fundamental to how we work on sustainability, that we do not sit in our corner of the world and try to find the best solution without sharing it. We need to share the way forward, and we need to help each other. And I am so privileged to meet so many students from around the world who have so many great ideas and so much passion for sustainability, and really just want to engage. But a lot of them don't know how to engage because they're new to working on broad scale projects, and they also have studies. So by bringing them together, we try in SOS to help them and facilitate forums and really give them the resources and the frameworks to be impactful. We also have done a big survey on students' perspective on sustainability in education. And I just want to share two numbers with you that I find very, very significant. The first one is that we found that 92% agree that sustainable development is something which all universities and colleges should actually incorporate and promote. This number is very significant because it just shows the drive and the passion for this among students. And then the second number is when students are asked to describe how they look on the situation with sustainability in the world right now, the most common word they use is worried. So there's a lot of drive for students. Students are worried and students want to do something. So as we have also heard from the other presenters, their inclusion of students is really, really important because they are right at the university, at the higher education institutions, and they want to take part. I want to direct you to the 2030 Berlin Declaration, where there is a point in that where I think is so important. It's the point about we need to empower young people as change makers for sustainable development by creating opportunities for learning and civic engagement and providing them with competencies and tools to participate in ESD as co-creators of individual and societal transformation. This word empowerment, what does it really mean? And what does inclusion of young people mean? What is it? Because we often hear that, oh, we are listening to young people, we hear them. But is that inclusion? Is that involvement of young people? I would say it is not. I would say it is only the first step. The second step is to actually involve them in the change. Because when you look at your project, whatever you're doing and when it comes to sustainability, and you can see that if you had included students and if you had not included students, the result would have been the same. Then your inclusion of students or young people have not been good enough, because inclusion is impact, inclusion is influence. And I just want to share this message with you that young people and students want to take part in societal change. They have the drive, they have the resources for institutions, and they can do it, and they want to. So that is really what I want to give to you with my little presentation.
Wonderful, Jacob. Thank you very much, and very honored to be a partner of SOS International. We have supported it from the International Association of Universities for long, ever since it started as SOS UK. And I know that that others have done the same, but really this is important. And I see your nuance between listening to and involving, and we have chosen to go for involvement. So indeed, you make a very important point. And I think that this group here today is really about that involvement, bringing together and working together to shape the future that we want for the society that we want as well. So thank you very much. And I'm pleased to now turn to you, Pornchai, dear Pornchai, I would say, because we've been working together for so long. Pornchai Mongkonvanit is the president of Siam University in Thailand. He's one of our esteemed members of the IAU. You're also the vice president of the International Association of Universities, and more importantly, you're the chair of the IAU Working Group on Higher Education and Research for Sustainable Development, where you have been of great assistance in the work that we do. But you wear many other hats also in the region with the Association of Private Universities in Asia, or with the International Association of University Presidents, or the Association of Universities in Asia and the Pacific. And that is also very important when it comes to better inclusion and integration. What Joanna said earlier, or Florencia, all these voices that we need to bring to the table so that we really have these global dialogues facilitated, also through the example that you gave, Maria, this other kind of capacity building and bringing on board. And you're right, Joanna, universities do already a lot, and this will be one of the examples. Siam University is one of such examples. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm also very happy to be with a lot of people who very much involved in this journey towards SDG. And then for IAU, I think that needless to say, higher education for sustainable development is also in the center of our organization, along with internationalization and leadership. And then today that we meet together is one day after Richard Branson went to the space. And what I like to say is that when I watch the televisions from the spacecraft, we have seen the world without any barrier. It's a real world. So I think that when we're talking about sustainable development, we will have the sense that every one of us is sharing the same planet. And what happened to the planet will happen to every one of us. So I like to say that when we attend the webinar like this, we also have realized that digital technology, next slide please, can put us in any place and with anyone in a very short time. We never been able to do this before, because before the pandemic, technology may be possible, but not widely used as it is today. So when we're talking about lesson, what we have learned from the pandemic, we also think that according to IAU survey, I think that it says that higher education cannot be the same anymore. If we try to do the same, we'll have a lot of problems in terms of finance, in terms of enrollment, and in terms of relevance. So what will be the question of the education administrator at the institution level is that how can we use digital technology? How can we use the thing that we have learned from the pandemic in order to transform higher education to be more meaningful? Because, you know, right now, what we are doing now is that we can talk with people all over the world. We can discuss, and I think that this might be the model of the university. We will not become the university of each particular country, but we will become the university that we can teach the students from various parts of the world, from various walks of life. We can find the professor who is the expertise in the field from any place in the world. But the more important thing, I think, that is our planet that we are sharing. How can we use what we have learned in order to transform higher education, in order to make sure that our higher education is still relevant? So next slide, please. So the proposal for higher education, we think that it's good to have SDG dimension in everything we have done. But it's more important that we should put SDG, or Education for Sustainable Development, at the center of the education in the university. We should use project-based pedagogy for teaching and learning and having SDG as the goals. And it should not be the professor teach the student, but I think that we should teach each other. We should learn from each other. We should move the traditional barrier. We should make higher education to be the real interdisciplinary by using SDG as the catalyst for change. And one of the examples that I like to show you is our IAU, Higher Education for Sustainable Development Global Portal. Next slide, please. So in this portal, we have the interactive, it is the interactive portal mapping of 800 initiatives from various universities around the world. We can learn what they are doing. We can learn what are the initiatives. And this can become, at the end, this also can become the good case study for the student and for our professor to learn and to use into our higher education. So we also like to welcome all of you to visit IAU, Higher Education for Sustainable Development Portal. We have done this for some years, and as time goes by, I'm very happy to see more and more people into our road toward sustainable development. We are very happy, and we think that it's time to transform higher education, because higher education should not be for particular institution. It should not be for particular country, but I think that it should serve our planet and our people. And right now, the technology has already enabled us to do it. It depends on whether we will have the mindset and intention to make it happen or not. And everybody should be involved in this process. So next slide, please. So I think, I also think that what we have to do is we have to think globally and act locally. Think globally and then also discuss and learn from global partner, which is very easy now after the pandemic, because everybody use Zoom, use technology. We can, if we like to discuss something, we can do it within a very short time. And then we're learning to transform the world and using SDG as a goal. This is also some project that we also have done. And I think that in order to conform with the lifelong learning, it might be the good idea to use the project-based so that the student can gain skill, competency, and value for their for their lifelong experience as well. So I think that in this new concept, the higher education will not be only at the institution, it will be everywhere. And we have to work with the community to learn and to gain the expertise. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then this is what we have done in our campus. We also have the project of healthy space, turning the dangerous area in the city into the healthy space. We also have the students and the faculties from many schools to work together, and not only work within our university, but work with our district community, work with the authority as well. We also have another project that is the time bank. This means that when you are young, you're working for the senior people, and when you become senior, you also can use that time in order for the others to work or to help you. And then we trying to turn the house for elderly to be the senior sustainable city, not like the detention center, but it will be the lively place, and also use the sustainability concept. We also teach a living lab in our general education. I think that these are the things that, for me, I think it will transform our way to teach and learn. And it is not possible for any SDG to be taught by only one or two disciplines. We have to break the barrier of discipline, and we have to use the project base. And then more and more people have to be involved. So today, I'm very happy to see many of our partners. I think that this is also the future, not for the higher, only for higher education, that will be the future of the planet that we are sharing. So next slide, please. And then when we mention about the whole institution approach, this is also another example that have been implemented by IAU, by HESD committee. We have about altogether about 100 universities working together on sustainable development. We make the cluster for each of SDG, such as SDG 11, that my university is participating. We have Siam University, Tokai University, and University of Surabaya in Indonesia, and Durban University in Africa. We are from different continents, different countries, but we're trying to discuss on the same SDG, sharing our experience. So in IAU, right now we have altogether 16 clusters. At each cluster, we will have the leading institution and satellite institution working and sharing together. And with this digital technology, I think that it even make it easier for us to work together in the most effective way. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think that this is the crisis that we are in. And what we need is that we need a good mindset. We need the alliance. We need friends to make this crisis into the new age of higher education, to be the new enlightenment of higher education, that is to serve the people and to serve the planet. So thank you very much. And I'm very happy and looking forward to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those insights and rich presentation. Before I turn to our last speaker, last but not least, I just wanted to remind everyone, as you're posting questions in the Q&A, please let us know if that question, a particular question, is for any of our particular great speakers, or if this is more general for anyone, so we can get you an answer soon. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Chandrika Bahadur. She's our Director at the SDG Academy and also the VP of Education. Chandrika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Florencia. Thank you, Hilige and Joanna and the entire team that's put this event together. I've been listening with a lot of sort of interest, and so much of what the previous speakers have said has resonated with me. What I want to do is sort of use the next 5 minutes to look a little bit forward, right, in terms of where do we go from the situation that we're in right now. I think a lot of speakers have spoken about the need for education for sustainable development and the need for interdisciplinarity. There's a lot of common themes that have emerged, but what do we need to do collectively moving forward? So a couple of thoughts. The first is that if you look at what has happened in the last couple of years, this is a quick snapshot of school closures, right? And the implication for higher education is that our pipeline of young people coming into the education system this year, next year, are coming out of this kind of environment where their schools have been shut for several weeks, if not months, and they've had to deal with the implications of a global pandemic. And so this is not a normal situation for universities around the world in terms of understanding, so in many cases, school leaving examinations have been cancelled or postponed. So universities are having to refigure how they actually admit students, what are the criteria. So there is a whole new complexity that is coming in terms of, and this hopefully is a short-term challenge, but it is something that is very real right now for the world that we're living in. So what is it that we're really looking at when we look at these immediate challenges? And the first is this reversal of the disruption of learning. What happened last year is what Dr. Porchai just described, which is that overnight, higher education moved from being in person to being online. We at the Academy saw this in a very clear way because we work with the professors around the world, and we started getting requests from faculty asking for help in how does one teach online, because there was no training, there was no preparation, there was no period of time where faculty could get used to teaching online. This happened pretty much overnight, and all of us that are engaged in online learning, and now of course that is most of higher education, we know that the mode of teaching online is very different from teaching in person. So this is an immediate challenge that a lot of faculty members have been grappling with, and I think, to my mind, from what I've seen, educators around the world have risen magnificently to this challenge in terms of trying to provide the minimum amount of disruption for their students. But the fact is that disruption has happened. The other, of course, immediate implication of the pandemic has been that students have lost the years of living and studying and working in cohorts, and really building on getting to work with other young people in face-to-face and learning all of the life skills that come with that. So that's another immediate challenge that will need to, at some point, will reflect in some way in terms of preparedness for life, for work. The second immediate challenge is that we are looking to prepare young people for a very different world. And what the last 18 months have shown us is that it is a highly uncertain world. There is economic upheaval. There are new jobs, new areas of work that have emerged. But most interestingly, I think for the higher education field, is that there are new questions to be answered. There is new research to be done. It's not as if these questions didn't exist earlier. But what the pandemic has done has brought them to the fore in a way that they weren't in a position of prominence earlier, and forced the issue of multidisciplinarity in a way that just did not exist pre-pandemic. So when we think about COVID today, we don't just think of the medical challenge of COVID. We think of the economic challenge. We think of the environmental challenge. We think of the fact that there are going to be possibly new viruses that may emerge in the future, that it'll change how we live and work. So there are urban issues to address. There are livelihood issues to address. And so the notion of multidisciplinarity, which is what the SDGs are based on, has been illustrated in a way both to faculty, but as well as to students in a way that hadn't happened earlier. The next immediate challenge is that of inequality. Joanna, you talked about this quite a bit in your presentation, but the fact is that all institutions are not equipped in the same way to deal with what the pandemic has thrown to us. So in many cases, students are not learning. they don't have access to technology. They're not able to go and complete their degrees in the way they would have liked. They don't have access to quality learning, and a lot of people have actually dropped out of the education system, more so in the school level, or more, I should say, better documented in the school level. So Hillige, one of the things I'm very interested in from your survey is to try and see if we can get comparable data actually for the higher education space, to understand exactly how enrollments have been affected, how learning has been affected over the last 18 months. And then the final challenge, which is kind of the heart of what we do at the Academy and what all of our partner organizations do, is to really think about the target of the SDGs on 4.7, which is essentially teaching sustainable development, but also teaching global citizenship and teaching skills for the 21st century, teaching the value of culture, of peace, of nonviolence, all of these issues that are normally not at the forefront of curricula in higher education. But this is a central goal of sustainable development. And so this is something that will, how this gets integrated and how this gets woven into the fabric of teaching is something that's going to be an ongoing challenge. What is it that we need to think about as we're emerging from COVID-19? I think the first very practical implication is that of safe universities, right? The first thing is for universities to open. There needs to be a lot more investment in making them places where students and teachers can interact. These are places of congregation, and at the end of the day, you want that interaction, you want that engagement. It is not something that can be entirely replicated online. So there is going to be the need for investment, as Joanna was saying, in universities to prepare them for a post-pandemic world. But going beyond that, I think one of the issues that young people are grappling with is the trauma of a global pandemic. And so emotional support, helping young people cope with loss and uncertainty, is a central element to helping them get ready to take on responsibilities of the future, which they will need to do. Hybrid learning is here to stay from everything that we have seen and learned. So combining online and offline teaching in a way that is smart, in a way that is effective, and to prepare educators to do that is going to be a massive challenge. I think a lot of learning right now has happened by osmosis, by need, by just the requirements of the time. But as we move forward, we really have to think very deeply about what aspects of teaching are more suited to an online format and what aspects of teaching are actually much more effective when they're done face-to-face. And then finally, we need to rethink what we teach, and I'll come back to that later on. So let's talk a little bit about the pathways over the next several years in terms of what we want to do. And I think the first tension that higher education needs to resolve is the principle, is resolving the tension between the principles of what I call sovereignty versus universality. So universality is what is defined by Agenda 2030 and the SDG framework, which all governments have accepted as the global priorities for the next decade. What that does not always align with is what national governments decide should be taught in their universities. And a lot of national governments have a very clear set of priorities, a very clear set of curriculum, a very clear set of topics that are sanctioned in order to be taught. Now, that's a model that is a little bit obsolete now because knowledge is much more free-flowing, much more accessible than it was before. But regulatory systems around the world are not in sync with that reality. So I think one of the central challenges for us to be able to really think about SDGs being integrated in curriculum is to resolve this tension between sovereignty and universality. The second trade-off that I think needs to be resolved is that between interdisciplinarity and specialization. Higher education is built on principles of specialization. That is how you go from being a bachelor in a subject to being a master of that subject. You spend a lot more time studying something very narrow, and then when you go on to do a doctorate in that subject, you actually go even narrower and even deeper into a particular subject. Now that is to reconcile that with the idea of interdisciplinarity in the way that all the previous speakers have described, will take a fundamental rethinking of how we judge and how we evaluate expertise. And the argument that I would make is that expertise needs to be evaluated not just in terms of narrow specialization, but in terms of the connection of that narrow specialization with a whole broad range of topics that are related to it. And that's the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals as well, the recognition that only focusing on health or only focusing on poverty reduction cannot be done without thinking of implications on the planet, without thinking of implications on relationships between genders, between races, between countries. And so that definition of what is expertise, I think, requires a fundamental rethink. The third pathway, I think, is going to be to prepare for work in a post-COVID-19 world. That is a big part of the role of higher education, is to really prepare young people for life and for work. And what we're going to see moving forward are a few things that have become very apparent right now. The first is that the world is complicated. We knew that, but we are seeing the complexity emerge in very real ways. And our education systems do not prepare us to manage complexity. And so that is going to be a fundamental part of training young people for the future. The second is going to be problem solving in the context of ambiguity. Now, this is again a very specific skill set, which is not something that is taught in universities around the world. People are taught to answer technical challenges. They're given technical solutions. That's not the world increasingly that we're going to be living in. We're going to be living in a world where anything that can be automated will eventually be automated. So routine tasks are going to get harder and harder to justify in terms of premiums in the workspace. What will be rewarded will be the ability to make sense of information, to be able to sift information, to be able to evaluate data, and to be able to solve problems that are complicated, that are open-ended, and that do not have easy solutions. And finally, as we move towards the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, we're already seeing it, an explosion of work in the green economy. And so we have to prepare young people to be able to work in these fields. And whatever they do, whether they are line managers or whether they are writers or whether they are data analysts, to be really able to think about what are the implications of what they're doing in terms of the planet and in terms of the consequences on the planet, in terms of the business models that they are developing or working with. The next pathway, I think, is something I made reference to earlier, which is the integration of EdTech. We've been working in technology for a long time in education, and what we've seen is that technology typically is developed by people who work in technology, and then it's adopted by people who work in education. We see that there are limitations to this. There is a fundamental, I think, shift that has to happen by having educators finally be the ones that design the technology that is needed for education. We haven't seen that happen at scale yet, but that is actually what is needed. And it goes back to my point of figuring out a hybrid model that is effective, because it's only the teachers and the students who can tell us what works for them. And the job of our programmers and our coders is to then respond to those needs. And I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments in higher ed, in EdTech in higher ed, that will allow us to be much, much more efficient at reaching out to the world. We need to, another pathway is around pedagogies. One of the things that's become very apparent now is that one doesn't really need to only be on a specific campus to access information from around the world. But for that to be effective, the pedagogies that we use have to be much more flexible, understanding that people are going to keep learning throughout the course of their lives. So they have to be more accessible. They have to be available to people that are outside of the formal education system. They have to be more affordable. In most countries in the world, higher education is still very expensive or is unfunded by the public sector and therefore not at a quality that would make it useful for people. But it has to become more affordable, and it has to be relevant for the problems that people are facing in their day-to-day lives. And that leads us to the final pathway of imagining a new business model for higher education. What that will look like is something we can talk about in the Q&A, but from our perspective, there would need to be a lot more public funding for what I would call the core of education, which is the hardware, the technology, the infrastructure, but a lot less in terms of what we expect students to pay as revenue, because there's enormous efficiency that we can think about reaping in terms of using technology to actually change the cost structures of universities and what they are built on. In this context, I want to quickly describe two initiatives that the Academy is engaged in right now, in addition to everything that Florencia presented earlier. One is Mission 4.7, which is a new initiative that we have launched together with UNESCO and the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, as well as the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. And this brings together leaders from government and academia and civil society and business to collaborate and support three core objectives. One is to really do this, to call on governments to commit to integrating Target 4.7 into their education systems in a very concrete and a very time-bound manner. And then to do the second part of what I was saying, which is to really think about curricular design, pedagogies, practices, things that work around the world that could help facilitate the transfer of this knowledge to these education systems. And then to hold everyone accountable, not just the governments, but universities, people that have signed on to pledges, educators, to make sure that we really are changing what our students learn and how they learn. And finally, I'll end with, because this came up a little bit earlier, which we've just launched in partnership with University College Dublin and with Sunway University, 2 online Masters in Sustainable Development programs. And now what this does is it's one model of what could work in the future, where there is a coming together of a group like ours, which essentially is a content curator and creator using our network and our reach from around the world. So the content is sourced from across the world, but then the actual teaching, the decision on what is to be taught, the admissions, the examinations, the proctoring, all of this happens within a campus setting. It is accessible to students around the world, so it takes away the need for travel. And it was really, this emerged in the context of COVID, but it's also a completely new financial model, because it allows for students to access higher education at a much lower price point than they otherwise would. And it allows them access to global resources from around the world. So these are 2 quick examples of some of the pathways that I described earlier. But I would say that we are at a point of tremendous opportunity for change. And I think if we miss this, we will struggle for a long time with changes that are already happening around us. And it really is incumbent on the education sector to step up and adapt to those changes over the next several years. Thank you very much.
It was for you to start, Florencia, on the questions.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. First of all, really thank everyone for, this depth and many insights that we have been hearing for the many minutes that we've been in this panel. One thing that I wanted to say, and perhaps these questions can go to Chandrika, because I see in the questions really a lot of reflection about accessibility of education. So if you perhaps could elaborate a bit more, and basically these questions, one of the attendees was reflecting on, as we noted, that many online courses can be free, and the SDG Academy is doing that already. How we can make sure that more formal higher education for sustainable development at universities, colleges, and so on is more accessible. So you tap on that a bit, but maybe you can elaborate more on that point.
Yeah, we have to be a bit careful, though, that we only have 6 minutes left for this session. And so time is ticking up.
I believe we have until 10:15, right?
No. Oh, is it until 15? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly then, I think accessibility is possible multiple ways. First is, of course, if there's free content online, it's a question of having people know that it's available and it's accessible. Of course, the challenge there is that students are already learning. They already have a massive course load typically. So for them to take on additional material, for them to search for it can be challenging. And I think this is where universities come in terms of being able to direct their students to free resources that can be additive and complementary to what they're already learning. The other model, of course, is for professors to actually use online content as textbooks, which is what a lot of our colleagues do around the world, is to use this content in lieu or in addition to formal textbooks to be able to both enrich what they're teaching, but also to keep it more up to date. So there are many different lenses to accessibility, but let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Chandrika. Hilich, we're going to do one each.
Well, if you want, this part is a bit more of we didn't orchestrate it exactly and decide on it. But yes, I think one of the questions that is important for all is the question that comes up in different forms in the Q&R, and that is education in danger in this period, and how do we see the future of education and then serving sustainable development? So maybe anyone who would wish to start on that would be welcome. So Pornchai, please, and maybe Maria and Joanna, you would wish to.
Yes, I think that education will be in the dangerous zone if we talking about the traditional way that we do education, because it was clear by IAU global survey. If we trying to stick to the same education and business model, I think that education will not be relevant anymore. But that's why I'm talking about the new kind of education, that we try to use the ability for us to contact each other very easily by digital technology. We think that we have to redesign the whole education to make it relevant to more of the people, to make the government realize that if we have the right kind of education, then education can transform the society. And when we can transform the society, education will have more value. So I think that in this way, I like to say that the old education or the existing model of education, if we try not to change, it will be in danger and it cannot be go on. And I think that the only way that we will be survive is that we have to find the right model, and the model that is compiling with sustainable development, which is very much need for our society. And then in this way, the education will have value to the learner, and value to employer, and also value to government and authority. Thank you.
I see that Joanna would like to come in, and then I would like to call Maria and Jacob as well.
So Pornchai, I completely agree with what you've just said, but I've also been listening to Chandrika answer some of the questions in the chat and some of the challenges actually around the current model of higher education. And I've made the claim that I believe strongly that tertiary education, by which I mean further education and courses that are under a degree level, be included in that in tertiary, should be available. And I've pointed out to the gaps in that. Now we know, because massive online open courses have been available for a very long time now, we know that they are not going to answer the supply and demand problem on their own. We also know that during the COVID pandemic, there's been extraordinary innovation, and not everyone has been without data. Some people have done incredibly well actually in finding ways of making that data available. So, you know, there are lots of lessons to be learned. And I think in terms of the need to change the education model, to think about the kinds of employability, applied skills that people need, that's one kind of pull, if you like, influence. And the other one is blended ways of working, making sure we use the innovations of MOOCs and online and technology and digital with the necessity to have local context and online and in presence teaching, or at least some kind of presence on the ground. The ACU have been doing a project in East Africa called the Programme for Enhanced and Blended Learning, where we've worked with 20 universities in East Africa to create really good quality content that's co-created and then shared, so that you're actually enabling more universities and more students to access material. That is a scalable model. That's a model that could be used in many other countries. And in fact, that's something that we're looking at. That's just one example. I'm sure we all have examples of that. So I suppose my point is that, yes, higher education models do have to change. We need to challenge the traditional academy of 3 terms and big holidays and you know, that kind of thing. Yes, we need to challenge, to Chandrika's point about, you know, if you have traditional disciplines built up on traditional knowledge learning, how do you encourage interdisciplinary, if I got that point right. But also the ACU has been doing work on decolonizing the curriculum, or decolonizing the academy, which means valuing non-traditional and traditional ways of knowledge and knowledge gathering and storytelling. And so you don't privilege one system or one hierarchy over another. And that, if you want to do that well across all the disciplines and across your campus and across your physical and virtual environments, then you do actually have to challenge the traditional modes of delivery. And maybe through challenging that, we would find a way to make tertiary education more affordable and accessible, particularly in those countries where at the moment it is not affordable or accessible.
Yes, Maria, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I think I agree with what has been said right now, and I think some of the challenges that have been pointed out that sort of puts us at a place where we say things need to change to keep being relevant and impactful probably precede the pandemic. So it's true that the pandemic has accelerated many of these challenges, but the question of interdisciplinarity precedes the pandemic, right? And I would say, maybe picking up what Jay was saying, that this comes back once again to the question of how the institution itself needs to transform, the institution of universities, because it's not just the function of education, it's also about the research, it's almost also about the operations themselves, no, that universities need to reflect upon. And it's not as easy as to say we need to transform ourselves. Universities are century-old institutions, and they do things in a certain way, in part to guarantee their independence and ensure that they deliver quality. And so when we've started tackling this question of the transformation, we see that there are some resistances. Some of them are just directly personal resistances from the staff. There are misaligned incentives for professors and for researchers to do these things, transdisciplinary, innovative educational methods, etc. And so I think this is another area where everything that was said at the beginning is so crucial. These partnerships, this learning by doing and sharing what we're learning, so that when one university is becoming successful, others can see what were some of the elements of those success. I'll stop here.
Great. I think there was another question here, and I think, Maria, you should stop on that as you were describing the whole institution change that has to happen in terms of research. And we also heard from Joanna talking about the importance of applied research and so on. So the question particular here is how we make sure, or like, you know, how research can contribute to the UN 2030 agenda, and, you know, to make sure that it's relevant and really tackling the real world problems that we have. Anyone, if you want to go, Maria, or anyone.
I can take that if you like, but I think, I mean, I think there is clearly a case for applied research, but there's also clearly a case for blue sky research, because you wouldn't have the COVID vaccines that we have if you didn't have blue sky research in the first place. And so I would defend the point of a university as being somewhere where you can ask open questions, and you need to be able to do so. But it's also this national context and local context where working in partnerships, for example, with industry, which there's some really good examples of, where you have entrepreneurial activity happening, where you do actually have industry and partners coming to you with problems and questions, and you can get people to solve them. And on the SDG model, it's actually a brilliant way of getting students really involved in real-time research, is to ask them those questions about how do you get clean water to a village, or how do you depollute a water system and enable a different kind of model of living, a sustainable city model to work. And to do that, you can't just use the university research department in engineering. You also need the design department. You need the social scientists who can explain human behavior. You need the people from UNITAR on the ground of the UN Sustainable development agency, and you need the local industry and businesses to agree to change how they're working and that they can work with you. So, there are lots of inspiring models in which applied research works, but I would also defend the need for institutions of higher learning or research institutions. In India, for example, in Germany, there are institutions that are not universities, but they just do research, that they should also be able to go to do research with open minds and open questions.
Absolutely. It's really about finding, right, being able to stand firmly on what we know that we know, but also dive deeply where we don't know and where we don't know that we don't know, right? And we've really been struck by that with this COVID pandemic. So I don't know if there are any other comments around that question. And Hilich, if you have another one. Oh, yeah, please, Portia, go ahead. Go ahead. You're muted. Go ahead.
That in terms of research, I think that like in our institution, we also like to make sure that if possible, we have to involve with the stakeholders. If it is the applied research, such as the industry and also the community as well. And we have to make sure that it's also touched the sustainable dimension of that particular research. Such as if we do the research about how to build the building, we also have to touch that in which way that we will implement the construction, or also about the energy that we use in the building. I think that we're trying to make sure that we also touch the sustainability dimension, because in the past, what we like to do is that we like to build as big as building as we can. But right now, we also have more questions to be answered. So I think that into the research, we also need to make sure that all of the sustainability dimension has been answered as well. Thank you.
I think Jacob wanted to come in, or am I?
Yes, I can think. I will go back to an earlier point about dangers to education, because I think when we look out in the world, and what I meet a lot of students from all different kinds of places, and there's really a variety of ways that you are a student in the world, and a variety of ways that you can engage, and you can be allowed to engage. I cannot forget the story about a group of students who were wearing the student union's T-shirt, and they were arrested because it was propaganda. And as someone who sits in Denmark, and I'm just baffled by that. So to be a student is a very different thing all around the world. So I also want to touch upon some of the dangers to education when it comes to what education is seen as valuable, because we do talk a lot about employability and what relationship is there to the community, to the business community, and all these things are important, especially when it comes to the SDGs. But there's also something that we should not hide away from, which is the unique abilities universities and higher education have to do something else. When we try to connect higher learning institutions with the wider world, we should not undermine our institutions. And as a student in the humanities and social sciences, I do see sometimes how my background is not always seen as valuable, because it is not something that can be as easily translated into the real world. So we need to have a conversation about how a multitude of different competencies can be used in the world. There's very practical skills that we need out in the world, and there are skills that might not be as practical, but are still very useful. So I think from someone as myself, I have had to spend a lot of time on thinking about how do I translate what I know and what I have learned into the world in order to not give ammunition to the people who are very critical of education in itself. And one last point that I just also thought about when listening to one of the other panelists was this whole thing about the digital transformation and how we do that in a good way. It is really something that demands didactic reflections. It's not something we can just do out of nothing. We cannot just turn on a camera and say, now I will do my lecture. You need different tools. You need to think about education in a new way. And therefore we need resources. The digital learning gives new opportunities. Hybrid learning allows other people to engage from a much wider variety of society. But we also need to ensure the quality of it. And we cannot just think that we can take what we already have and just put it in another context.
Thank you. If I may, Florencia, I really thank you also here, Jacob, for raising the very important issue that universities or education or higher education at large is not only for employability, but it is really to prepare citizens to become critical and active citizens in democratic societies. And that's not the reality in many countries around the world. And as you said, wearing a provocative t-shirt is possible in certain countries and not in others, but that's only wearing a t-shirt. Imagine about voicing your concerns or raising issues related to the global goals or any of those. Then higher education is certainly also about personal development, because if you don't allow for people to also develop themselves, you will not have the opportunity to develop the kind of societies in which we all wish to live, because each and every individual has something specific to bring to the table, unique to transform the way in which we look at the world in which we live. And then the very important point of what higher education stands for is to develop a very broad knowledge base based on a lot of diversity, where we need to connect the world in more creative ways and transform the world for the better. So these four different major and fundamental objectives have to be taken as one, as they are complementary and cannot be isolated. Very often we see, even now in this pandemic period and all the crises that derive from it, that the social sciences and humanities are at odds, and that is a problem for our future. We will not be able to move into the future if we continue to look at things in a very restricted way. What is profit? What is beneficial? What is this? How can we measure? How can we? All of that is from a discourse coming from the world of economy, which is perfectly fine for certain parts of our societies, but doesn't apply to everything. We will dry out as a humanity, as a world, if we don't count on all the creativity that comes with culture, art, opening up the ability to develop different disciplines or different approaches to things. And higher education is also an opportunity to dive into a world of unknown, things we have never been familiarized with, things we've never seen. And we all know that the more you learn, the less you know, because the world out there is enormous. So the opportunities to develop ourselves are infinite. That's where we really called for whole of institution approach, whole of sector approach, and a very strong emphasis on pre-primary until lifelong learning through higher education for the many. But Joanna, you wanted to say something else.
I wanted to come in, yes, just on what Jacob was saying, because I completely agree with the points he's made about the disciplines, but actually I would challenge you on the technology, I'm afraid. You know, actually, over the last 18 months, everyone has gone online, those that can. There are huge disparities and there is a digital divide, without any doubt. But institutions that have spent decades talking about whether they could or couldn't put lectures online, or invest in educational technology, or invest in support for students online, they've done it. And they've had to do it. And actually students and lecturers alike have had to learn how to learn in different environments, including in schools. And it's not all great. There is a huge disparity in experience, and in places that do it really well and places that haven't. But that's partly actually the point and the responsibility of our networks, is to share all the learning we've done in the last 18 months and apply it so that actually we can use this technology and innovation to make it more equitable and accessible, and I would argue always in a blended format. But I just wanted to come back to you on that point.
We will need to close soon. So Florencia, would you like to start with a few words, and then we see that this is only the start of much more.
I mean, I think there's this, we need a couple of more hours to really dive into all of the important and interesting insights that you all have brought. I just wanted to pick on a couple of things to close and really give you a warm thank you for really sharing your expertise and your experience with all of us. And I hope that we can continue this conversation offline as well, and in further years as we meet for these workshops. So I just wanted to say I really resonated with me Jacob's points on kind of the techno fixes also, and the need of sound ethos, right? And I think this is a lot about this partnership that we're talking about, but not just partnership with people, which has to happen, and it's what Hilich was saying, right? Being able to value what each of us bring to the table. And just be something that is for everyone and leaving no one behind, and acknowledging that each human being has talents that we can bring together and really solve these issues. But also in the discipline, right? If we're not able to see the marriage between the technology and the arts and the science and the social science and so on, we're not going to be able to really fill those gaps and solve these important solutions that we have at hand. So it's really about being more holistic and making this change in mindset that we are up to. So I mean, there's a lot that I'd like to cover. I love, and this backs to the humility point that Maria brought in even in the action of the guide, which I think is a wonderful guide. But humility has to be in our actions, in the way that we approach education, right? If we believe that we know it all, or like it's really about my area of expertise, or like we won't really be able to look at the big picture, even less achieve these important issues. So everything is about work in progress and really collaborating to be able to have and continue these conversations and build the world that we want. So I feel like I'm not making justice of everything that has been said, not traditional ways. I mean, like Joanna, you explicitly mentioned like challenging the traditional ways to learn and being able to incorporate those non-traditional methods, and I think that's key to bringing that inclusivity, that inclusion, but also to make it more affordable and more relevant. And I think probably we'll just stop there. Hilich, over to you. But thank you so much, everyone. There's so much here that we're learning, and thank you so much to the teams that have organized this conference. Hilich, over to you.
Yeah, indeed, I agree with you. It's impossible to summarize this. I think that will be for each and everyone to listen again to this session and hear the many great ideas that were shared by Maria, Joanna, Jacob, Pornchai, Chandrika, by you, Florencia, and also by the many comments received in the Q&A and in the discussion space. I see that I shocked some people by saying that the more you learn, the less you know. Actually, it is the more you learn, the more you realize that there is so much more to be learned. And that really, as I answered to one of the comments, that's the beauty of it. But that's also dazzling. That's what higher education is about. You can always improve yourselves. It never stops. But it's this opportunity to liaise with so many people, so many viewpoints from around the world that makes the world that we want to become even better. So we need to be open to that. And I think that sustainable development in its own broad diversity, with these 16 to 17 interesting global goals, they have this opportunity to bring us to something else, to knit our knowledge systems together in a very creative way. And that is what all the speakers have shown again today. So this is only the way to next year's HLPF, I think, where we will have an opportunity to meet again on these very important points, but not only then, also the way to it. So let's continue to work on these important topics together. Thank you very much for you all, for the speakers, for the organizers, all those we don't see, but who have been so incredibly fantastic in organizing this session. Shannon is not speaking, Isabel Thoman's not speaking, Meredith I see. So there are many others who have contributed to making this session the success it was. We know we've had many people in this session and also live, and we hope people will take the time to watch again. Thank you very much to all. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Porn Chai. Safe travel home. I know it's very late for you already. Thank you for your availability. Goodbye. Safe travel.